Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
It's on to Plan B as the president now gets his say. Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power as President Trump schedules a news briefing that is set to begin any moment now after the Supreme Court struck down the president's tariff regime earlier today. We'll discuss this coming up with Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern and Bloomberg's Jeff Mason with insights from constitutional law attorney Robert McWhirter and our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Shanzano is with us alongside Republican strategist John Seaton. We're going to learn a lot this hour, so stay with us. And we set the baseline first on Wall Street. Nora Melinda has her view on the markets live from World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Nora.
Hey, Joe, we check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. U.S. stocks are rising. That's after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Donald Trump's tariffs, the court saying Trump exceeded his authority by invoking a federal emergency powers law to impose tariffs. Taking a look at the broader market, we've got the S&P 500 higher by about 0.4%. Taking a look at the NASDAQ Composite Index, up 0.7%. And that blue chip Dow Jones Industrial Average up about 0.1%. Let's look at the volatility in the market, keeping an eye on the VIX Index, currently hovering just below that 20 handle. And we do see the yield on the benchmark 10-year Treasury currently just below 4.1%. And the policy-sensitive 2-year Treasury yield at 3.5%. We've got West Texas Intermediate crude currently trading at $66.43 a barrel. We've got gold and silver both advancing. Take a look at gold. We see spot gold up above that 5,000 key level. And digging into some of the individual movers, we're keeping an eye on Newmont shares. They're falling after the company said it expects to produce less bullion this year, partly due to planned upgrades at some of its managed mines and lower production at two ventures jointly owned with Barrick Mining. And Live Nation shares climbing after reporting revenue for the fourth quarter that beat the average analyst estimate. Analysts are positive about the company's full-year forecast and strength in its concerts business. And lastly, shares of Walmart are declining for a fourth straight session. That's after HSBC cut the recommendation on the company to hold from buy. The analyst saying that while Walmart's fourth quarter results were solid with volumes growing and e-commerce performance strong, the outlook for 2026 is, quote, surprisingly weak given solid trends. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nora Melinda, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Nora Melinda, thank you so much. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, and thank you for being with us here on the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Not exactly the boffo reaction that many analysts predicted on a day like this. A red-headed Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, and you get a ho-hum reaction from Wall Street. And that has a lot to do, likely, with what we are about to hear. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, we've got a live view of the White House briefing room right now, a dramatic view of the briefing room. They brought the lights down ahead of President Trump's news briefing. He's going to walk in that room any moment now, and we're going to bring you this news conference as it happens, presumably one that will include questions. They don't always. We're going to spend a little bit of time gearing up for this news conference with Annmarie and with Jeff Mason, who's with me here in Washington, remembering, of course, this is the president's signature economic plan, or at least the center of his economic policies, something he's been talking about for months. Listen.
We're getting rich because of tariffs, by the way. I hope everyone understands that. Tariffs are bringing us hundreds of billions of dollars. Without tariffs, this country would be in such trouble, as they were for many years. Every prediction the critics made about our tariff policy has failed to materialize. 78% reduction in our trade deficit, and next year we're going to be positive if we keep it all going.
Not that they didn't see this coming, and that is why the White House has about a half dozen options they can pursue here with other justifications, not to mention, as we're hearing, an attempt legislatively to maybe bring forth an IEEPA fix through reconciliation that also might change the game here. And that's why we're seeing still a lot of uncertainty in the markets and, of course, in the political world, where we start with Bloomberg chief political correspondent Annmarie Hordern, who's working overtime at World Headquarters in New York. Annmarie, I'm so glad you could join us as we wait to hear from the president. Reports suggest that he is not a happy guy today. What's he going to tell us?
No, absolutely. He's definitely not happy, Joe. And as you rightly point out, this is their signature policy when it comes to, you hear the administration talk about how they view their economic policy. This was one leg of the third-legged stool. And you mentioned potentially, what does this mean for Congress? Well, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion, when Congress grants the power to impose tariffs, it does so clearly and with careful constraints. It did neither here. So the president now knows he cannot use IEEPA. This is for the reciprocal tariffs. This is for the fentanyl tariffs. It's about 70% of the tariff policies the president enacted. He used IEEPA. Very blunt, very flexible. We've seen him also talk about IEEPA. He can use it maybe on individuals that are trading partners of Iran, or remember when that fight happened with Europe when it comes to Greenland. So now he needs to rely on other measures. And they have a plethora of measures they can use. 232, 301s, likely they're going to rely heavily on 122s. I mean, there's a number of other actions they can use, but the problem is these actions will take time. Some of them require investigations, and sometimes you can't go as high as, say, you wanted to with IEEPA. There are going to be constraints for their plan B.
Fascinating. Everybody's become an expert on the Trade Act of 1974, including Jeff Mason, who's with us in Washington, Bloomberg White House correspondent. You're no stranger to this boss walking into the briefing room. The tone and tenor might be a little different today. What's in store for us?
I mean, I don't think we need reports to suggest that he's upset. I think it's just going to be obvious. I think he's upset, in part because of everything that you two were just talking about. Like this is his favorite word. He's called it his favorite word. And he uses it not just as the third leg of the stool of his economic policy. He uses it as a cudgel against other countries for foreign policy. He uses it as a threat to get what he wants. Greenland was a good example. He's used it in, some could argue, positive ways in terms of helping to stop the conflict between India and Pakistan. He uses it for everything. Yes. And now the Supreme Court has said that's illegal. And by the way, a Supreme Court that is conservative in the balance of power on the court because of the three justices that he put on there, two of whom ruled against him. So it's a rough blow for him politically, and it really limits his options in terms of what he can do on the foreign stage and on the economy.
Annmarie, we've seen a couple Republican jailbreaks when it comes to legislation around tariffs. Does he have the support? Mike Johnson says they're going to have some kind of a legislative fix that he'll bring forth in the coming days. I suspect that the president will roll it out at the State of the Union. But does he have the support of the Republican conference if this comes to a vote?
I mean, I think it's going to be very challenging, right? You have individuals like the chair of the Financial Services Committee, a friend, I know, Joe, of your show and mine in the morning, French Hill. He was saying that basically he agrees with the Supreme Court and the fact that Congress is the one that needs to legislate when it comes to tariff policy. And then you have someone like Senator Bernie Moreno over talking about on Twitter that basically Congress needs to, now that given this basically power from the Supreme Court again, although they've always had this power, basically saying we need a reconciliation bill to uphold Trump's IEEPA. Basically, Congress then, if the Republicans were to go through with this, Congress saying we want to give some of our authority over to the executive branch. I think that potentially some individuals might come out and say this because it sounds good for the president, but can you really see senators lining up and saying, yes, we want to give more power away. We are here to protect the institution. We want to give more power away to the executive branch. I'm not so sure.
Well, it's something we heard from Mike Johnson on social media. He said no one can deny the president's use of tariffs has brought in billions of dollars, created immense leverage for America's trade strategy and for securing strong reciprocal America First trade agreements with countries that have been taking advantage of American workers for decades. Jeff, he says Congress and the administration will determine the best path forward in the coming weeks. You could argue that the Supreme Court did a favor for the speaker here in the throes of a midterm election cycle, and maybe he might want to slow his roll on this. What do you think?
I mean, you could argue that the Supreme Court did President Trump a favor.
Exactly.
If it helps,
maintains a majority.
Indeed, and if it helps with inflation. I mean, you know that one of the key talking points that Democrats are using and were going to use in the midterm elections was to talk about the president's tariffs boosting prices. Right. The buzzword of affordability is one that gets under President Trump's skin. In some ways, that's going to be a little bit harder, depending on how the economic numbers, of course, go in the coming weeks. But the Supreme Court taking this tool away in some way takes a messaging point away from the Democrats as well. Right.
There's got to be some truth to that, right, Annmarie? And what does that mean for the State of the Union address?
Well, two things come Two things come to mind, potentially, if this is going to help the president. As Jeff was just talking about potentially inflation, you had that report that 90% of the tariffs, it's the consumer that's bearing the brunt of this. I know Kevin Hassett came out and said maybe some economists need to be disciplined. I think today he said that he got a little bit emotional about that report. But if you see in consumer sentiment surveys, tariffs, especially last year, post-Liberation Day, this was a lot of concern for consumers and worried about prices going higher after we already had sky-high inflation under the Biden administration. Second, I'm looking over the financial markets and they're higher today. So Wall Street is definitely moving in stride with the fact that maybe we won't have as high of tariff rates. But we need to remind everyone, it's not that we're not going to have tariffs. We're just not going to have tariffs under IEEPA. This administration has made it very, very clear. When it comes to tariff policy, there will be tariffs. They will just find other avenues to enact them. And that is why it's so interesting today. We also learned about the president's dates for going over to Beijing. A lot of the high tariff rates we have when it comes to China are due to IEEPA, but there are still 301 and 232 tariffs in place that definitely affect Chinese goods coming into the United States. And we can see some of those 301, 232s be used for other countries or other sector specifics for the president to get a similar average tariff rate that he's been using when it comes to IEEPA.
Really interesting. You know, it's a big deal. When Annmarie Hordern and Jeff Mason are with me on TV and on the radio at 1 o'clock, we are waiting for the president to walk into the briefing room at the White House. Yes, exactly, Annmarie. How did I get this? My heart is exploding right now. We got our 2-minute warning. Guys, the president's going to be walking in just a moment. It does look kind of dramatic in there today, Jeff. How's this going to go? He speaks for 45 minutes and takes a couple of questions, or is this going to be a conversation?
You know, I loved how you said in your intro that sometimes you just don't know if he's going to take questions because we have obviously seen him come out there and just deliver a soliloquy.
That's right.
But he also often likes the back and forth with reporters.
Sure.
So,
well, and you know what it's like to be in that front row. What would you be asking him?
Well, I would certainly ask him politically, what does this mean for you? And in terms of some of the specifics, what's your backup plan? Obviously, they were prepared or needed to be prepared for this. So what are they going to do? And how long do they expect that to take? Also, what is the plan to deal with refunds if the lower courts order them to give it back? How do you do that? What kind of a financial hit does that take for the Treasury? How do you pay the farmers, which he had planned a big chunk, I think $12 billion from the tariff revenue for them? Does he have something else in mind for that? And also, I'd be curious just to ask him, how do you feel about the fact that a few of your hand-picked and appointed, not just appointed, they had to be confirmed, of course, justices voted against you?
Wow. Refunds, Annmarie, are one thing. What about the $2,000 checks? We're not getting those now?
I don't think so. I mean, again, Congress would need to decide on that. I don't see an appetite right now for Congress for those $2,000 checks because right now, with IEEPA being illegal, the funds are cut short. They're going to stop, and companies are lining up for rebates. Page 63, Justice Brett Kavanaugh's dissent, he talked about this. He said he wrote that for the group, IEEPA clearly authorized the president to impose tariffs. This was his decision. And he talked about, though, that the refund process was, quote, likely to be a mess, as acknowledged this is what he acknowledged at oral arguments. So basically, the administration, actually, that was part of their argument. You know that we can enact tariff other ways. This is so big. We've already had these trade deals done, and the refund process is going to be a mess. It likely potentially could be a mess, especially given the fact that if you are going to be living basically in purgatory as a company or a country waiting to figure out from the administration what policy they're going to use. Quickly, I did speak to someone. I've been trying to call these foreign officials that did the deals with Secretary Bessent and Ambassador Jamieson Greal, and they've said to me, look, this doesn't change for us. The administration made it very clear if the Supreme Court was to strike down IEEPA, they were going to use a 301 or some other avenue with us. So they don't think any of this changes. Potentially, though, this just creates a little bit more of trade chaos. We are not past, it seems, as Wall Street liked, the idea of peak tariff policy. We're not past that yet.
You're asking just the right question, though, Annmarie. That's so important what you just said and fascinating what you're hearing, Jeff. This does not mean an unwinding, then, of these trade deals that the president has secured.
No, and I think that's in part why the market is being a little bit unsure as to how to react, because even though he has lost this very powerful tool, we know that he's going to continue to find ways to keep tariffs in place, and that will apply to the trade agreements as well.
Just heard from John Thune, Republican leader in the Senate. Of course, tariffs can be an important and effective tool to address unfair trade practices. This sounds exactly like what Mike Johnson wrote, Annmarie. He goes on to say Senate Republicans will continue working with the administration and our colleagues in the House to advance our shared goal to strengthen rural America, including South Dakota's farm and ranch communities, and the broader U.S. economy. I'm not sure I get what that means, actually. Annmarie, where's John Thune on this?
Sounds like a nothing burger. Sounds like he doesn't want to upset the administration, but at the same time, he is the Senate Majority Leader, and he probably feels like this was a huge win for Congress. And the fact that Congress is the one that has the power of the purse, and Congress is the one that should be the ones enacting tariff policy. I mean, this is what you heard from the Supreme Court Justice. So we probably need to hear more from, I think, Senate Majority Leader Thune. And I have to say, all of this is going to be fascinating on display on Tuesday. All of these individuals will be at the State of the Union,
100%.
including Supreme Court justices. How acrimonious is that going to get when the president goes off script?
Can you make the whole Supreme Court the designated survivor? Like, how do they get out of this, Jeff?
Well, also, like, what's the body language going to be like?
My
Because
God.
he, you know, the president, of course, walks down that aisle. And
Nobody's shaking hands there.
Yeah, and he's visiting with people usually from both parties and also the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court justices are often very careful about maintaining a neutral face during the remarks. It'll be very interesting to watch his face when he gets close to them on Tuesday.
You know, it was suggested, Annmarie, that they were going to wait, maybe do this on Wednesday because of this very issue. But they know what they're in for, right?
I think they do, yeah. I mean, wonder if some of them are thinking, actually, I can't make the State of the Union. I have family engagement or another engagement. I'll be out of the country then. Because obviously, for those that voted against the president's tariffs, I imagine, you know, Jeff brought this up momentarily ago. A lot of these individuals are on the Supreme Court because of the president. And the balance of power on the Supreme Court is conservative, but they made it very clear using IEPA in this way is not the legal justification for IEPA. So I imagine the State of the Union, that is going to be, I'm sure it's being rewritten right now about how the president is going to be dealing with that. All of this, of course, just fascinating going into a weekend where we are also talking about the fact that the president is potentially weighing options, and he said that this morning about what to do with Iran. So we're going into an incredibly uncertain week ahead.
I think it's also worth noting how unusual it actually is for the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court, to rule against President Trump.
That's right.
For most of this second term, whenever his powers have been challenged on nearly all of the decisions that have come that high up to them, they've sided with the president and with the White House. So that's another sort of blow to him, is that on his signature issue they didn't. And it's all, you know, I don't think we can say is this a sign of things to come, but it is a chink against, or a blow or a cut, or I can't think of the right word, against the broad powers that he has assumed since coming into office. And they are broad, and he has really tried to make the executive very strong. And that, of course, has upset a lot of people who oppose him. And for many reasons, or in many ways, the Supreme Court has supported it, but not in this case.
I'm sure I'll upset someone by asking it. Maybe both of you want to try to answer it. Does this make a strike against Iran this weekend less likely because everyone will say tail wagging the dog?
I think that's a terrific question. You know, you would think that the president would make his decision based on you know, the military reasons for a strike, if that in fact is a decision that he makes. But I don't think you can rule out that that this impacts the timing one way or the other.
Yeah. How about you, Annmarie?
I think these are two different parallel stories. I know for us, it's and the market and just Americans across the country trying to digest a lot of headlines coming out of Washington and uncertainty. But when you look at the Supreme Court decision, we have been here so many days. I have been lined up 10 a.m. refreshing the SCOTUS blog for a number of days, and you just never know when the Supreme Court is going to come out. When it comes to Iran, forget what the president's even saying. Look at the military buildup right now in the Gulf. And by Saturday, you're going to have a second U.S. aircraft carrier. We have not seen this type of hardware in the Middle East since 2003 and the invasion of Iraq. So I think if the president has been preparing for potentially doing something on Iran, I don't think the Supreme Court decision on tariffs is going to get in the way.
Interesting. That's going to be the question, though, that everybody asks, of course, right? The Friday night to try to change the subject kind of move. We'll see how that goes, and I suspect he'll be asked about this, Annmarie, unless the president refuses to talk about anything other than tariffs. What do you think?
I imagine he's going to be asked about this. I mean, if I was in the room and, everyone else started asking about tariffs and
You'd go to Iran.
And he gives you, we know what he's going to do. You just want some of the specifics. All right, which avenue are you going to go? More 232s, more 301s. Who's going to be the individual alongside Ambassador Greer leading these? And then it comes to the rebates. Then I think you want to ask about what is going on in the Middle East and what is going on in Iran. Because what we've seen play out is that this administration, at least from a military perspective, is definitely prepared. The president said yesterday 10 to 15 days is the timeline. Last time he gave a similar timeline was over the summer, and it wasn't 2 weeks. Within days of saying that timeline, he ended up sending B-2 bombers into Iran to go after their nuclear enrichment facilities. So
That's right.
I think you have to really view these as two separate stories, and potentially we'll get some clarity today when the president speaks.